Welcome to the Festival. The plan was to show you the video, but due to some technical errors that didn't happen. But my whole intro starts with that. So readers, I'm just going to read what I've written. Readers, I hope you liked what you saw. It was a vision for Nagpur created by one idea, discussed over coffee, shared to a few others and to some others. And now we're here, sharing a screen and observing that vision and developing our own ideas at the same time. That's what innovation actually is, isn't it? Mere thoughts and ideas turned into slow and steady action. And before you know it, it's a part of life. Once upon a time, India was the richest country in the world, roughly in the 1700s, because of its resources. The world started adapting to this rich culture, and slowly it became a lifestyle that was admired by the world. In the 19th and early 20th century, the international order was based on emerging industrial capabilities. And now, the development in AI, which is artificial intelligence, will shift the balance of power between nations. All major powerhouses are keenly aware of the potential of AI to advance their national agendas. We're all affected by it in our day-to-day lives every single day and every minute of the day. For me, it's every second of the day. In fact, we are the ones driving an algorithm by ourselves to transform the world unknowingly. Or is it the other way around? Are we actually driving it, or are we just merely floating while the real game is played by the big powerhouses of this world? This is what today's event is all about, and I cannot wait for us to get into conversation with two spectacular personalities. VLF is not only a festival for readers, but more so for learners. Over the past year, when COVID was freaking out, we have had several books and authors come our way, presenting such amazing topics that are widespread, conversations that have opened more eyes and shut more mouths. From learning about Indian banking, to what millennials want, to what cinema gives us, to what it means to be gay in India, to farming crisis in Vidarbha, and many more such books that have come our way, which are extremely crucial for knowledge and personal development, and perhaps even opportunities down the line. Let's just have a huge round of applause for the team at Vidarbha Festival for what they've given us till date. So I, Arushi Nayak, your MC for the evening, and now I'm official active member of VLF, welcome you to yet another fabulous evening ahead of us. Readers, we're in conversation with two spectacular personalities filled with the most insightful bits. Before we jump to that, VLF always has something special cooking. Do we have the V author here? Alright, so I'll just, if he's not here, so I'll just introduce the segment. And so every event that we have, is he here? Mr. Ajay Chikade? Okay, so I'll just introduce the segment. So every event that we have at VLF, we always have this special segment where we let Vidarbha authors, local Vidarbha authors present their published books to our readers. So readers can interact with them and buy their books as well. So it's to promote reading and to have people write more books and literature. I'm sure we would have loved this book. It was all about poems and it was in Marathi. Muthi Til Valu it was called. And I actually practiced my Marathi back at home. I was like, okay, I have to say this after he's done. So anyway, I didn't get that opportunity, but let's move forward to introduce our moderator of the session. A perfect moderator is one who is keenly interested in topics that drive passion from within. He has to be a great listener and more importantly, has to ask the right questions for the knowledge to spread like wildfire. He is all that and beyond. He has a profound understanding of how the world works, along with how to make ourselves work according to the world around us. He's a businessman, an entrepreneur, a passionate and loving father, but most importantly, he's one of the main guys running around to make this event possible. He's the festival director at VLF, super passionate about non-fiction literature, and given this topic, he claims that he's always observed the fusion of technology and geopolitics with a bystander's gaze. There's much more to this guy, and which cannot be put into words, and only to be experienced over a cup of coffee or tea and perhaps half a day on standby. Now readers, Before I call him on stage, I would also like to introduce our author. Anirudh Suri is a venture capitalist, technology entrepreneur and policy advisor. His interests lie at the intersection of technology and geopolitics. He is also committed to help India and Indian startups to cement their space in the global tech ecosystem. He is currently the managing partner at India Internet Fund, a technology-focused venture capital fund based in India and the US. Previously, he has worked with the Government of India in Delhi, McKinsey and Company in New York, and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, D.C., and Goldman Sachs in London. Overwhelming? That's right. Now forgive me for copy-pasting from your website, Anirudh, but I honestly could not personally tweak around the details. And we are actually so happy that you have such profound experience in the field that you've built on your own. And so readers, without further ado, let's have our moderator Pawan Sada and our author Anirudh Suri on stage. Forward. Thank you all for listening to me yak for the last 15 minutes. Thank you.
As I was tying up my shoelaces at home, my wife came up to me and told me, whispered actually, she said, this is the closest you're going to get to the Harvards, Whartons, McKinseys and Goldman Sachs of this world, so you better do a good job of it. And that, ladies and gentlemen and dear readers, is the state of my mind and my marriage right now. But I know you are least interested, looking at in your eyes, you are least interested in my state of mind or marriage. Let's focus on the person of interest for this evening, and that's what, and his diverse interests as well. So I welcome Anirudh Suri to Nagpur and to VLF. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
We now, all of us know what the resume tells us about you and what remarkable things you've done on your life. Now, would you mind telling us a little bit more about your childhood, your teens, basically the stuff that doesn't make it to the resume and CVs, but actually end up making you? Please.
So thank you. First of all, I think I have to say I feel a little bit overwhelmed by the super kind and generous introduction and welcome here. I'm super excited to be here in Nagpur with all of you, and I think first congratulations is due to all of you and I think VLF, the team that's leading it, and also it seems like the volunteers who are powering you on, and I'm even more delighted that now I've met two daughters who are volunteers. This morning I had the opportunity to meet Sachin's and now Devendra yours, and I'm a proud father of two daughters, and so I'm absolutely, who are also big readers. They're much younger, so I'm absolutely delighted that you have such a nice team of young volunteers also with you here. My wife jokes that this is my resume, when you read out and might sound good on paper. But all of these things, to be honest, mean little. Unless you've done something, I feel like substantial. I mean, these all otherwise just places you've worked at or schools you've been to. So I actually do find them to be probably the less significant part of my life. So I'm glad you asked, I think, the right question, which is what is actually what matters to someone in their lives. So I'll tell you a little bit about my growing up. I grew up in Delhi. And I think I referred to this a little bit in the introduction of the book as well. I grew up in a fairly typical middle-class family in Delhi where my grandparents had come over from Pakistan post-partition. And so there were all those remnants of families that had basically migrated and gotten completely displaced, right? And of course, as little kids, you don't, I think this is the piece I talk about in the book, as little kids living in these neighborhoods, which now in retrospect you understand were almost like refugee migrant colonies, right, in Delhi. They didn't look like camps or anything, they were proper neighborhoods, but you realize that so much of what I've written in this book called Geopolitics was right in front of me that time. But you don't realize it then. As a kid, you're busy playing cricket on the streets and things like that, and that's what I did. And later you start to recall events and personalities that you've seen around. I'll mention a couple. So the part of Delhi I lived in, I must have been a couple of years old when the riots happened, the Sikh riots happened, and West Delhi was also a big, I would say, suffered from it. And so a lot of the politics was driven by that. But that time as a kid, you don't understand. You see signs of these mix of communities that had moved over from Pakistan to India. We have people from Multan, people from Lahore, people from Sindh, and all of these people were being referred to by their regions. And at that point, you don't quite know what that even means. I went to an Irish Catholic-run convent school in West Delhi, in Central Delhi, and you don't realize the significance of that either. There's a geopolitical reason for why I ended up studying in an Irish Catholic missionary school in Delhi, right? And so in a way, I had a very, I would say, like a regular childhood for a kid in Delhi. Until the time I think I decided that something in me wanted to get out and experience, I think, the broader world, right? And post my 10th grade is when I was lucky enough to get a scholarship from Singapore Airlines. And I went to Singapore. It's a long story which I won't bore you with, but almost didn't go because my parents had just seen my older brother leave home. And as the two kids in the house, there was a lot of resistance from the grandparents and the parents to let both. That's right. Both birds flew away from the nest, so there was a lot of resistance, but I think I credit one of my father's friends who last minute I think convinced him to let me also go. And so then I spent a couple of years in Singapore, finished up high school there. And from then on went to the US, studied there at a small liberal arts college where I also ended up meeting my now wife, then friend.
So let's have a round of applause for Guru here. She's welcome to VLF and Nagpur. And
and that liberal arts experience in the US also shaped me in many ways that I think will then reflect later on, I think, as we talk about the book as well. Because the liberal arts experience, education experience, and I bring this up in answer to your question because that is one of the things more than any of the institutions that might seem impressive on the resume. That liberal arts college experience in the US really shaped my thinking about the world and thinking about various disciplines. It teaches you, unlike unfortunately in India where the system often pushes you to specialize very early. You either become an engineer or a lawyer or your chosen profession very early on after 12th grade. In fact, now that specialization is going even younger and younger, right? You start preparing for your competitive exams even earlier, like we were discussing with Sachin earlier as well. And so, the liberal arts experience actually in the US allows you to really learn about the world from a multidisciplinary lens. So you, no matter what you will focus on in your degree, you end up doing history and philosophy and psychology and music and math and a whole range of disciplines. And you, in a way, subconsciously learn to look at the world from a very multidisciplinary standpoint. And my book was actually, in many ways, an ode to that education experience. That you can't look at something like this unless you look at it from a very broad multidisciplinary lens.
But before Anirudh became Anirudh Suri, was he always this mellow? Because for a Delhi guy, you are way too mellow to talk to. Even on the phone, even everybody who interacted with you so far, was he always this mellow? You can be very, very honest on this. It stays in this room, doesn't go to very good, doesn't go out.
So I think fair point. No, I wasn't this mellow. I don't think you can be this mellow growing up in Delhi, but to survive. But I think maybe it's the time I spent out, but I think it's more than that. I think at some point that angry young man of the Amitabh Bachchan kind has his life. Right? I mean, you can't continue to be the angry young man in life. Or the aggressive traffic navigator in Delhi. But no, I think that there are times and occasions where you find that the mellowness is not there also. But you learn, I think, in India that not everything can get done that way also.
But now that there was some small little detail that got hidden in your profile that was mentioned by Narushi, was that you worked with the government, and we would like to know more about it, if you can tell us an insider thing into it, more than the globe-trotting and all that. So please take us through that journey of how and why did you work for government and how that happened, and what was your experience like? So the difference basically between how to work, how MNCs work and consultancies work.
So I worked in the IT ministry, which is now known as METI. That time was just Ministry of IT and
this was which year, by the way?
This is 2009 or 10, 2009. So you asked about the personal journey. So there's when I was in school as well, I was really into debates and quizzes and things around current affairs and international relations and politics, and even in my undergraduate studies I focused mostly on economics and international relations, and there was this abiding interest, I would say, throughout for me. And my father was a lawyer, so I'd seen this side of public service and government work in some ways being in Delhi, and I had a very deep interest in that. And of course, growing up, you also believe that the government is a big influencer in how things are done and has an impact on society. So that was an interest of mine. But of course, that's not where my career led me to. I didn't go into obviously civil services or anything like that. But even after I had worked at McKinsey, I always wanted to spend some time and work in the Indian government as well. And so I did. I worked in the IT ministry as a policy advisor that time. And the work that I did was largely focused on, I would say broadly, the theme of tech inclusion. So smartphones hadn't quite penetrated at this time. It would be a couple of years later that smartphones would really start to pick up. And that time the focus of the government was to ensure that the internet would reach the deepest and most remote parts of India. So there was a scheme called the Common Service Center Scheme, CSC, which still actually is going on, where the idea of the government was to place these internet cafes that could serve in each panchayat or each cluster of villages throughout the country, to allow both e-governance to penetrate there, right? So government services to penetrate as well as
so the BharatNet, basically the BharatNet infrastructure that was there.
Correct, and to also encourage rural tech entrepreneurs who would set up these cafes or these common service centers, and that could become like a tech hub for that village. So where kids could do anything, they want to do internet applications for colleges, they could do that. You had to come do anything around taxes or subsidies, you could come do that.
And what was your role like in this?
So my role was to basically ensure the implementation was being done correctly, because it was actually a central scheme being implemented by states.
So you were connected to the grassroots as well?
Yeah. So I was visiting several states, studying whether what was being portrayed as having been done
from PPT to the panchayat
was whether being done or not, and to find real practical hurdles. For example, we found that in the reports that the ministers would get, there were a lot of internet cafes or these CSCs that were active. But then once you start getting more detailed data, basically put a detailed metric set for the minister to monitor, and in that you realized if you just ask how many of them had electricity, suddenly that number was much smaller than the number of CSC cafes, centers, and so you realize that of course without electricity you could have these be functional, and so on. So you start to realize that actually there's in a country as big as India, tech inclusion, even with the infusion of massive funds, sometimes doesn't quite get implemented on the state, right? At the state or district or local level. So that was largely my goal, to help ensure that the scheme was being monitored much better.
So one major difference in one word, if you can, or one phrase, between the best in the world and to work in the government, inside the government, and that too at the cutting edge of governance, which is the technology. What was that one word that you found really different or better or not?
See, governments are inherently less entrepreneurial with people.
Okay. So let's freedom, if you want to say.
Less entrepreneurial, like I think is actually the word I would say, not just freedom, because there's a level of initiative and incentives to do something differently or something more efficiently. I think that sometimes does get lost in the government setup.
Yeah, so that entrepreneur mindset is not encouraged here or don't have an option.
Hard to do, even if you are of that kind of personality, it's hard to do that.
Let me tell you guys, book I read, I started reading this book and I never thought I'd read it page to page. I thought I'd just finish it off enough or read it enough to be able to ask him a few questions. That was the original target. But when once you start this book, and if you only know the world map, and that's all you need to know before you know anything. And this book takes you, everything else it does, hand-holding to take you to the depths of it. So wonderful, wonderful book on the basis of what you've written. I would want to ask you, the first thing that comes to my mind is, geopolitics is quite a game in itself. Now, there are no permanent friends, there are no permanent enemies, there are only permanent interests in geopolitics. What made you think of a book like this? Because for Indian authors, Indian reader, such a book with an Indian prism, Indian lens is very difficult to find, which talks about geopolitics but with technological lens. So please tell us your challenges or thought behind writing this book.
Sure. I think we were just discussing that very briefly before we came up. I had worked in the policy world and the think tank world for a long time. But for the last decade, I did the technology world, and while I was in the technology world, I was not doing much policy work or writing. The last 3-4 years saw these two worlds collide. Right? They were colliding in front of me. The tech world, which had so far been fairly disconnected from the government and the policy and the geopolitics worlds, was starting to collide with this geopolitics and foreign policy related worlds. And I had a very deep interest in both. And so really I would say the main driver for me to write a book like this that's at the intersection of tech and geopolitics is I was interested in both these things. And luckily for me, they collided. I think the people I talked to on the geopolitics side had no idea about the tech world. The tech world, epitomized, let's say, in Bangalore in India, had no idea about the geopolitical implications of what was going on. And so I thought that was actually very important to bridge that divide. Right? That really was, I would say, the main driver to write this book at the intersection. As to your question about the Indian perspective, that was the other driver that, I think much like you were saying, and I think all of you who are involved with VLF are avid readers, you'd find that the books that are written by the Thomas Friedmans of the world, or by the Yuval Hararis of the world, are often written obviously from a Western lens. And these books typically span either history of the world, and geopolitics and economics and current affairs, and I found that, much like what you just said, the Indian perspective on these things was missing. We were largely still focused on our region. So we write a lot of books about India, Pakistan. We write a lot of books about India, China, Max, that's right. And I thought that an Indian view of what's happening in the world today is missing, and hence I wanted to at least kickstart. And I hope that will continue.
For a book of around 550 pages, and to have 150 pages of almost 150 pages of notes and references, and to quote at least 200, 300 top people, what does it take to research for such a book? Because amongst us are a few people who dabble with writing as well. The dream of writing of something like this, of course, but something even half of this would be great for them. So what would you suggest? What did you do to research for a book like this to be authentic, to be absolutely, credible?
First, I have to credit my family for giving me that time.
Especially when wife is in the house.
That's why this comes first. I love to talk about this, and I'll mention it again if I answer questions. So my older daughter at some point told me that, Papa, you've got to stop writing. You've got to stop writing. You've been writing forever, and my little one's birthday was coming up, I think, in 3 days, and she said, Papa, if you don't stop writing now, your book will not fit into a bookstore. So you've got to stop. Right? And I end the book with that line from her, because I think that really made me pause. But the research process, and for those who are in the audience who are thinking about writing books, I think I probably did something that I should not have done, which is I actually just let myself go. Right? It should not have been 550 pages. My editor was not very happy in the beginning about this, but the sections and chapters kept getting added because I thought they should. But I think the research process was twofold for me. One was, I think that the first part of my research for the book was largely what you would call secondary research. I just, much like many of you here, I just had already read many books that had informed my worldview, and I knew which of those books I wanted to go back to read again, etc. Then I just, for every topic that I was covering, the first step in writing this book was the chapterization. What would be the section? What would be the chapter?
5 parts and 16 chapters that would happen. Yeah.
What would get covered in each chapter? So I had a sense of what each chapter was going to look like before I started writing, and so I just went into this rabbit hole of any given, for example, when I write about the industrial era, 3 or 4 people have written it, and then you go into their footnotes and their.
For the readers' benefit, I tell you, there are at least, I lost count after 60 or 70 books that are referred in it, and they are all fantastic books. My current read, this one I finished 3 days ago when Vinay took the photograph of this book that was mentioned. Right now I'm reading The Lonely Century that was mentioned in this book. Fantastic book, I'm halfway through it now. It's a fabulous book. Every book you pick up and look up on Google, you will find that you will be downloading the sample at least on Kindle. So incidentally I am also part of that 2-daughter club. So my younger one also said the same thing when I was busy reading this book for a week. She kept telling me, Papa, ye wali kab khatam ho gaya? So pretty similar to that. Moving on, I want to understand in the first part, and this is where we are in the crux of the book, where in the first part we talk about this fantastic fascinating correlation between the journey of technology and the tectonic shifts in history, which is the feudalism, industrialization, imperialism. What was the idea, and would you concur with Karl Marx when he says history repeats itself first as tragedy and then as a farce? Would you concur with Karl Marx, and what would be your thoughts on why history has so many parallels, and why does it have, because in your first section that's what you mentioned.
Okay. No, of course I have emphasized in the first section a lot of parallels, but of course there are lots of differences. Right? So I do think that history does repeat itself, but not exactly, right? So there's always differences. I think the era that we're living in today, the mid-decade, as I call it, will have many similarities, but many differences as well. So I think that it's not an either or. But
so would you like to talk about that fantastic example that you mentioned about the telegraph cable and the fiber optic?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, and I discovered many of these parallels as I started reading about the history, right? So, and I think that's what I've tried to get people to do. That sometimes you think, I think many of us think that what we're living through today is very different from our parents' generation. Our parents think, their generation was absolutely different, and I think once you start going in history, you realize the parallels. So one of the parallels that I've written about is the history of the telegraph. So today, of course, the internet is seems like one of these modern inventions, crazy inventions that only the younger generation has experienced. But if you go back 150 years, when the telegraph cables were getting set up between Britain and North America, that was the first telegraph cable that was laid that had a similar impact. It shortened the time by actually much more significantly than the internet has done vis-a-vis the telegraph, for example, or the telephone. Right? That's when we really went from ships at that time to literally a few seconds. Right? And now we've gotten from, let's say, a few minutes, a few seconds to maybe a few microseconds, right? But that transition was really major. And one of the parallels I draw as far as its importance in geopolitics is concerned is today many of you might know, many of you might not, that the internet infrastructure of the world largely consists today of these underwater sea cables. Now these underwater sea cables are laid by a select group of companies that are largely Japanese, French, American, now Chinese, because the Chinese have also realized the importance of these. Back then, 150 years ago, the British had understood obviously the importance of the telegraph for maintaining a colonial global empire and the communications, and really the telegraph enabled in many ways global war to happen. Otherwise, there was no way for you to communicate in such vast distances. Now the telegraph cables, when they were laid by the British, they also dominated the entire industry. The manufacturing of the telegraph cables, the ships that were required to repair them if they were broken, the raw materials that were growing, for example, in Southeast Asia to make these cables, the entire supply chain was controlled by the British. And during the early years of the telegraph cable, it was seen as a benign technology that was enabling economic activity. Financial markets are going to get based on that, and so on and so forth, communications. But soon when the geopolitical battle started between the colonial powers, the telegraph technology became weaponized. So right before World War I erupts, when the UK and Germany started World War, one of the first things at least that the British do is cut off the cables connecting Germany to other parts of the world, to disconnect it. Now the parallels to today's world are almost like 100%. Today we have these undersea cables. Many of you might not know where they are, who's building them, who can repair them if they get disconnected today. But these are going to be very important questions if tomorrow war erupts, which given recent developments seems more and more likely now. And India, for example, has no too little capabilities to build or repair these cables in water.
Nor manufacture. No manufacturing. So who's the real controls the manufacturing of this cable? Because it's very, very...
So manufacturing of the cables and repair of the cables is largely controlled by about 4 or 5 companies in the world. One is a French company, one's a Japanese company, one's an American company.
So, and one of these Korean?
Korean is now the Chinese have Huawei, for example.
Yeah, Huawei is one of the...
Huawei is more famously known in India for their 5G networks and so on and so forth. Also had a subsidiary which is now renamed, but it's called Huawei Marine Networks, whose primary job is to lay undersea cables connecting, and it's a core part of what some of you might have heard of, which is this BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, or the Digital Silk Road Initiative of China, which is connecting China to other parts of Africa, Latin America, Asia. And so the Chinese don't want to rely on these cables that are laid by, let's say, American companies or Japanese companies or French companies, because in addition to being cut off, these can also be very easily tapped. Right? And there are, for those of you who followed Edward Snowden or the Snowden files, you'll find a lot of detail in that set of documents about how certain agencies in the West are tapping most of these undersea cables.
So when you talk about undersea cables and the strategic alignment that the world has shown so far, what do you see as why is it that it is without a trouble right now, without a seeming trouble right now, it goes so seamlessly well when it has constant tensions there, there's constant friction going on in world's past, but yet you have internet service absolutely, the cables going on. So why not first, destroy, damage, trouble them? So if Russia goes to war, to blueprint. Why would they do that?
They do it.
How easy it is for somebody to do that? I just want to understand from a layman's
There
perspective.
are two aspects to this. One is that this has happened. In the modern day world, cables have been cut off.
Intentionally,
Intentionally, that's right. In Eastern Europe, I've talked about instances where
Yes.
Russia has, in the last decade or so, used this strategy. Correct. And in 2015-16, the New York Times had reported that a couple of Russian submarines, I believe, were noticed around in the northern Eastern Europe area, very close to where these submarine cables lie. So in fact, now there's only one organization in the world which publishes maps of where these undersea cables are. I've included with their approval a map.
Absolutely.
But that's something that most governments now don't want published because it's a source of possible vulnerability. That's one. Now second, why don't they happen more? See, countries that have gotten this historical context are a lot more careful, and you can be careful in multiple ways. One, you can have companies that have that capability, so you can bring back these cables, repair them very quickly if
Lesser downtime.
and there's a lot of, by the way, destruction of these cables or problems that happen unintentionally also. Fishermen with their fishing nets can also possibly. But the other thing that countries or governments have done is they are now creating redundancies, which is a technical term to basically say I'm not going to rely only on one cable. I'm going to have multiple cables. So even if one cable gets cut, I have 2 other cables or 3 other cables to rely on. So many countries, and that's one of my recommendations also for a country like India, that you've got to have a lot more redundancy. We only have currently, I think, single-digit number of cables coming into in India, right? So could be very easily actually.
So it's quite.
Could be a source of vulnerability.
We'll move a little from geopolitics for a minute and talk about. And you mentioned a very nonchalantly mentioned in the book that tech is no more a sector; it's a factor. And then there's another phrase that you use that tech is now seen as how you Adam Smith saw capital. Can you please connect these and explain this to readers so that they can have an insight into it?
Yeah, so I've tried to give a framework for everyone to understand how important now tech is.
So I ask this from the perspective of that there are a few SMEs and tech entrepreneurs sitting in the audience as well. So what would be your advice from this perspective of tech being a factor instead of sector?
Okay, so when I say factor of production, I think many of us know that, or at least students people who study economics will definitely know this, I think. But even others will know that there are typically 3 factors of production that matter in any business or any sector. There's land, labor, capital. That's what mostly people talk about. Which in other words, you can say land, wherever you are doing your business, labor being the talent that you or other people, your employees, and capital, typically you can basically just say money or access to the resources, loans, etc. that you need. Of course, capital technically has a much broader definition, but put very simply, businesses, whether you're an SME or a large business, have typically needed these 3 things. My argument is that today, tech is no longer just a sector that needs these 3 things. Rather, no matter what business you're in today, you could be a bookstore, you could be a farmer, you could be a IT services company, literally anyone. You could be an author. Today, tech is as important to you to accumulate. And some form of tech will depend obviously on what business you're in.
Yeah, even the commodified businesses, all of them.
But just like you seek to accumulate the best talent for your business, the best or the largest amount of capital that you need for your business, and the land to typically physically base your business in office, you today need tech. And these 4 factors of production now will determine how successful you are in your business, in your services, in any kind of endeavor that you have economically. Right? So now, what's the difference that I'm trying to communicate? Often we think in India also that the tech sector is the IT services firms and Bangalore, to some extent Gurgaon. I think that's a flawed or a myopic view of how technology is shaping the economic destiny of nations. you've got to make sure that people, no matter what sector, no matter what part of geography they're in, you have to start accumulating this tech as a factor of production in your business. And India as a country must realize that we've got to accumulate this as a factor of production as well. We continue to run after capital, that we don't have enough capital to do X. For example, in climate change, we continue to say let the developed countries give us $1 trillion. We're basically asking capital. Actually, we should also be asking about technology, right? We should be building core technology. We should be innovating. I think we were having this conversation earlier. We must be actually building core innovative tech on our own at some point. Because accumulating that is what's going to drive our economic destiny in the future. We can live on borrowed capital, but I don't think we can live on borrowed technology for us.
That's what it said. Now, now the dreaded C word in geopolitics, China. Please take us through what is different in the intent. Everybody was power hungry, is power hungry. Everybody wants dominance, assertive dominance. But why is it that even somebody like US, Russia, anybody is dreading China right now, or aligning their policies or suiting their policies to see China as this behemoth or something who's wild card, who's unpredictable, absolutely. So, what is it that makes China such a strong player?
See, I'll maybe use the concept of the great games that I've used in the book to explain my view on this. See, in history we've lived through these great games. What I call great games, we call them eras, etc. But in each of these eras of great games in the past, whether it was the advent of agriculture, the great agri games I call it, or industrialization, colonization, global trade, more recently capitalism, each of these eras have seen new winners and losers emerge, based on who was able to master the key capabilities of that time. Capabilities differ in each era. You can't say I will win this game with the capabilities of the previous game.
The steam engine was one time there was capability.
I can't win the great tech game with capabilities suited for the great industrialization. So that game is an older game. But each of these games, as you transition from one to the other, and it's not like a one day.
It's not a
lot of overlap, and of course many of these games continue to exist. Right? But the main game that is today happening is the great tech game. Now, usually what happens is in each game, let's say the great capitalism game, the country that is the loser, or the relative loser, let's say in this case China, sees the winner of the previous game, let's say the US in the great capitalism game, and says, how do I leapfrog? So to leapfrog is the typical strategy. You do not try and attack Google head on search. You try something else. Similarly, what China is doing to the US and what the US did to the UK back then in the industrial era is to master some of the game that was the previous game, which is capitalism, which is what China did over the last 50 years. They mastered that game of capitalism and global trade, and since their entry into the WTO really became active players in the trade, global trade and global capitalism game, realized now to win in the next game, which is the great tech game, and beat the US to assume sort of this mantle of global leadership. They're going to beat the US at the tech game. And now more than Russia, more than any other country in the world, today the US is threatened by the Chinese technological capabilities. And that's where in India we must understand the game that is truly going on between the US and China. At its heart has technological leadership at stake. More than anything.
And military, nothing, no diplomacy, no military, no allies, nothing.
So I'll draw another example with history. When the UK was the primary industrial power during the industrial era, they had mastered the steam engine, invented steam engine and the railways and everything that came with it, the seas, etc. Now the US is sitting there looking at the UK and saying, how do I get forward? There's another way within the industrial era after the steam engine era that comes in the form of electricity. In the invention of electricity. The US was probably the biggest adopter of electricity as an invention, as what I call a general purpose technology. I don't call it, that's what it's called. And the applications of electricity. And that really powers their growth in the early 20th century to actually leapfrog in front of the UK. Right? So the Chinese are thinking a very similar answer. They've said, okay, maybe we weren't the ones who invented the internet. Maybe we weren't the ones who invented the semiconductors and so on and so forth. That sure happened in the US. But now when the next waves of tech innovation are going to happen, we are going to master that. And the applications of it. Much like the US did to the UK.
So that's why AI once gets worked.
So if you look at the China 2035 plan, there's 10 technologies listed. They're hoping that 1 or 2 or 3 of them will help them leapfrog the US, and it's very much possible. Because we've seen analogs in history also, and today if you talk to people in the US, they are very worried that when it comes to artificial intelligence, when it comes to climate technologies, when it comes to quantum computing, all of these, what I call waves of tech innovation within the broader tech game, the Chinese are at par or possibly ahead. So the consumer internet game is gone. It's like played. Right? Now the focus is on them. So when the Chinese, as and when they become better, and they will on many of these, the US really fears that they'll lose that tech edge, and with that tech edge they'll lose the economic edge. With that losing that economic edge, they'll lose their geopolitical and military edge. Right? So that's the game. Now in India, unfortunately, we still see this as a India-China battle for Asia, or dominance in Asia, or multipolarity in India. And what I've tried to explain here is that that's the traditional geopolitical way of thinking. That we are actually fighting with China, competing with China for a multipolar Asia.
So we have $5 trillion economy and whatnot. It's not there.
That's all
the game is not happening there actually.
Okay, that is also happening, sure.
Right.
But really the game that India must be fighting or competing in is this great tech game where, much like China is trying to do to the US, we should also, not that we are doing it against any country, but for our own development, to drive our own economic engine, we must be looking at these emerging ways of technology.
So this model looks like the great tech game, but it has so many parallels with the sacred games. Who will be the Trivedi who survives this? Please enlighten us on this, because this seems as if nobody is a clear winner right now. There was Europe, in that imperialism, UK was the clear winner. Now then you have industrialization, post-industrialization tech. This US was the clear leader. Do we see a clear leader coming out, or will it be like this for the next 4 years?
Each of these games, Pawan, have had a winner seen like the clear winner retrospectively.
Yes, in the hindsight, true.
But if you look at even the colonialism game, the UK was not the first colonizing nation of Western Europe. It was Spain and Portugal.
Yes, totally.
They then get disrupted by the Dutch. Then the British Empire comes in and all that. Right? And then the fight is between US and UK and France for colonial empires, and then Russia eventually also is battling it out in Central Asia with Great Britain. I say all this to say that sometimes the winners don't seem clear when you're in it. You also have to understand the winners will not remain the winners 30 years from now.
Yes, it's a very...
Because if that colonialism game lasted 250 years, the mantle changed 3 or 4 times. So if you look at the Great Tech game, if you can go back to, let's say, at least 40 years to say the Great Tech game started with the advent of the internet, of semiconductors, etc., this current wave at least, you can say yes, the US has been a winner. Very easy for the Chinese to become at least that core competitor, like the US, UK and France. Today we see US and China, or Spain and Portugal. Question is whether India can be in one of the next couplets. I think that who will survive, now again you can draw on historical analogs. You'll have to be the smartest about it in many ways. You have to, one, develop that core tech capabilities yourself. You have to do some kind of innovations that the others are not doing. That's one. Second, you've got to have, today is a much more interconnected world than was the case 200, 300 years ago. Today, I think one of the biggest weaknesses for China now, or the biggest cons now for them to be the winner in, let's say, the next couplet of countries that come up, is their lack of alliances and friendships. And that's why investment is possibly a big enabler for us too. I think it's likely that we could be, in 30 years, be one of the top 2 nations in the Great Tech game. But we've got to get our friendships and partnerships right. We've got to get our tech right. One of the things I emphasize a lot in the book is to win in the Great Tech game and in these emerging tech ways, you've got to do R&D in the country. Today, India is abysmal in its R&D, research and development capabilities. And to win in the Great Tech game, one of the key capabilities is you've got to spend on research and development.
Allow me to come back to that in a while, but I want to understand one very quickly about how places like Taiwan, Israel, Singapore for that matter, or even Ireland, how do they get ahead in such places? There are dependencies, US have on Ireland for that matter, or China has on Singapore. How does these things happen? ये छोटे कहाँ से मशरूम हो जाते हैं? What happens?
इसका भी कुछ ऐसा हो कुछ नया नहीं है ना ये. I'm sorry for repeating it.
Yeah.
आप global great trading game की बात करोगे तो great trading game में भी there were these what were called trading entrepôts or trading hubs.
Yeah, that's a wonderful term you use.
So now I say that these countries that you mentioned, Ireland, Singapore, Estonia, Israel, they have become digital entrepreneurs. They have said, how do I, despite being a small nation or a nation state, how do I become relevant to the larger digital superpowers? Just like the Malacca Straits, Yemen,
Yes.
Malabar, these places were not the biggest agricultural producers at that time, but they were trading hubs. And how did they become trading hubs? I have a very interesting story about the Malacca Straits and the things that Malacca did, that time when the rulers of Malacca did to make sure that the trade that was happening from China towards Asia, the rest of Asia, and then on to Europe, was passing through Malacca and not other parts of Southeast Asia. The best institutions, the best tax regimes, secular, no discrimination against whichever religion trader wanted to come there. So you see like 65 nationalities of traders in Malacca 500 years ago.
Yes.
You have the best tax rates, right? No discrimination.
Which is what for a while Singapore, Hong Kong did, which is what
And the best policies.
Yes.
And today if you look at Singapore, Dubai, Estonia, Ireland, these guys are doing that. These countries are basically following the footsteps of a Malacca from that previous game, where they're saying we're going to build the best, most attractive policies for data to flow through us. Singapore today has more undersea cables going through Singapore than India. Why? India has the biggest consumption of data in Asia ex China, but somehow the undersea cables go to Singapore and from Singapore. The AWS servers serving your Netflix videos are based in Singapore. Why? Because better policies. Now, if you continue to draw policies that are industrial policies in the digital world, in the great tech game, you will be a loser. But India could build those digital ones. That's what these countries are doing. They're building infrastructure services, regulation, tax incentives, and so on. And just friendliness, hunger.
Fantastic. Now I want to understand I want to broaden this up even more. When we were in the 90s and we both were in 90s at the same age, I guess. So based on that, there were always being talked about that more technology will enable more democracy, more democratization, and decentralization, and power to the common man. What happened to that dream? Now we have a sudden spurt of absolute power-centric authoritarian governments coming up, or showing power. What is happening with that, and why is it the dice fall the other way?
So, absolutely right that the vision of the internet when it is invented in the US and in Silicon Valley, the internet has been going to be consumer internet, was invented by effectively people with libertarian philosophies who said, and I have a very interesting quote, a couple of quotes in the book about this, where you have Mark Zuckerberg saying Facebook is no less than government. There are these cyberspace declarations happening from people from the valley saying governments of the world of this industrial era. In fact, if I can find it, let me quickly refer to it. They say governments have no role to play. Now they say the libertarian philosophy says we are better off managing our own affairs. We don't want the influence of governments. Now governments have always had this fear that they will get disrupted by private sector players or the citizens. And so the states often find a way to come back and exert their power. And this tug of war, what I call the tug of war between states and big tech firms today, is effectively what you saw maybe even the East India Company and the British Crown back in the day. Where at some point the East India Company becomes too powerful, according to the British Crown, and starts doing things that seem counterproductive to the ambitions and the objectives of the British Crown, the Queen. And that's when they pull the rug off. And they say, okay, enough with this large private company. So governments today are in a way in the same similar mindset where we've seen these big tech firms emerge as probably the biggest, most powerful threat ever in history.
And there's this conflict, constant conflict that
They don't want to give up, governments don't want to give up their power.
not single power.
It's very simple. And so you'll find that governments around the world are pushing back. That's one. Second, counterintuitively, technology, as we were discussing in the case of telegraph, seems benign in the beginning. But then people in power find ways to leverage that technology for their own purposes. And that's what governments
That's
around the world have.
that's how we are here. Now, before we have last few minutes and a question to ask, one question and a very quick answer. I know it's would be a letdown to not to take that question, but for the age that lives and believes in Netflix and chill, what would be, and you very, very strongly and wonderfully talked about that in the last chapter, about the philosophy of the technology. Can you quickly tell us, as readers and everyday users of technology, what are the top 2-3 things that we need to be thinking about before we let technology take over?
Okay. No, I think Ayushi answered that question actually when you were doing the introduction, where you said that it's up to us whether we want to just continue to be shaped by technology or whether we want to become active shapers of it, right? I think it's very important for us to realize that technology, if we remain passive, technology can very easily shape our lives, how we spend our time, but more importantly, our values and our behaviors, right? Like you were saying, that every second of your life could today be shaped by your smartphone and Netflix and Instagram and so on and so forth. So I think the argument, and again, I don't have actually clear answers on this point, and also by the way, there aren't enough people thinking about this globally. The impact of technology on our values, on our behavior, and that implications that will have when our values get shaped by it for the next 30, 40, 50, 100 years of our lives is something we've got to study a lot more. But the one point that I have made in the book about this, and the conclusion I came to is the following. Let's see, ultimately what drives us and what shapes us is our values. And this might sound like a very sort of
Cliche or
but ultimately that's really the crux of how we must think about technology. We should decide what are the values that we hold paramount first. Then let those values shape the use, the design, the development and the regulation of technology. Right? And what I mean by that is today if inclusiveness or sustainability is a core value that matters to us, let's say as Indians. And these values will differ by nation, by region, and even within a nation by...
So precisely what we did with CTBT, NPT in terms of nuclear weapons, we need to do similar kind of thing with technology to think about it, decide and have values in place before we launch technology or allow technology.
Correct. If fair competition is a core value that we believe in,
then we should allow.
Then that's what should guide us.
So very quickly, one word answer to this, one number answer to this. A game within a game. So a game always has a game within a game and then there is a game beyond the game. I want to know from you, all the scholars, all the academicians, all the readers, all the people who are interested in geopolitics right now and technology, most of geopolitics, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much a real picture do we have of the actual happenings, even despite of a great tech game, a book like this, or the best of the resources available, best of the media available, social media, Twitter. Despite of that, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is the most real, authentic knowledge and understanding of geopolitics, how and where is a lay reader right now?
1.
Thank you. That sums up briefly. We are ready for questions, please.
The comparison between East India Company and Facebook was just mind-blowing. Just wanted to follow it up. And the question I had was, so you mentioned that there's a lot of analogs that you see between what happens today versus before. So, and you also mentioned that it's very important to set values. It's very important to have the right values. So do you see any analogs between our current values or the values of the current superpowers versus the values of the superpowers of the past? And can we also draw some ideas as to what values should we have now to become a superpower?
No, great question. Let me just say on that Facebook East India Company analog, a lot of differences also. Just want to clarify, happy to talk more about that. But a lot of differences also. And the world today we live in, very different, much more aware. Having been through a colonial history, we are a lot more aware of the perils of colonialism, but a lot of parallels do exist. So now I have a question about values, right? So, see, the industrial era, the winners in that game, the great industrialization game, clearly put in place certain values like scale, efficiency, cheaper cost. We don't care about the environment. Those values we continue to suffer from today. The winners of the great capitalism game, let's say, epitomized by the US, fairly similar values. Consumerism comes in, emphasis on wealth comes in, Forbes richest 100 comes in, right? You're not valuing other parts of society as much anymore. These are the values that come in that today we continue to suffer from.
Inequality and this wealth distribution, yeah.
Correct. Now, so the values of each of these games, when you look back, have been very flawed. Now, today what values we want to build, that's actually the debate I'd love for all of us to have, because it's not, I can't tell you what, you can't tell me what, it will have to be a societal deliberation or that, but I'll give you some thoughts from my side. Sustainability. If anything, this whole climate crisis is teaching us that we cannot not value sustainability on. Second, in a country as diverse as India, economically, socio-economically, in all ways diverse, inclusiveness. We cannot have a country where we see such disparity in economics and prosperity that you see massive economic backlash. That's effectively what happened in the industrial era. Pre-World War I, when economic inequalities become so big, you see the backlash of socialism, communism, all of that then results in great wars. So you want sustainability, inclusiveness. I think privacy will increasingly become a value that we will all have to sort of espouse, given the mobile device now is so intrusive. I think many of us in India don't quite emphasize it enough, but I think we will going forward, because data in many ways is that the land of colonial era. People are just grabbing into it, thinking it doesn't belong to anyone, but truly it belongs to you. Right? The British had this term called the terra nullius, which was like, wherever we go, this land we find doesn't seem to belong to anyone, so it's ours. Today you can argue that a lot of tech firms believe that this data lying around, no one's, so it's ours. Right? So privacy and ownership of that data, how will we think about the data commons? As by the way, the India Stack or the Aadhaar project, these are really elements of a new vision for a data commons, right? Where data is not owned by a select few. These kinds of values, I think, are going to be the most important.
Yeah, you spoke about how research is going to play a very important role for India to take a place in the geopolitical game. I'm an academician myself, and there are a lot of stresses coming on research. What I find is that we're doing research for the sake of research. We don't care what happens to it. We are being told to paper निकालना है तो हमने फैक्ट्री खोली है research papers की, right? So don't you think that is becoming more counterproductive, because we're going for quantity now, not for the quality of research. So what can the government do to kind of change that, because the mindset that is getting affected?
इसमें गवर्नमेंट नहीं कर रहे। रिसर्च आप कर रहे हो, आपके ऊपर जो रिपोर्टिंग आपकी हो रही है to let's say another professor or to the dean, etc. It's up to you. Why should the government actually? You don't want the government to interfere. Government नहीं कर रहे। आप लोग at some point you have to say कि जो भी मैं research कर रही हूँ, it should matter. It should be different from what everyone else is doing. In a way, that's one thing. There is no government को actually बीच में लाने का नहीं है। One. Second, I think India में we need a lot more applied research. क्योंकि India is at a point where, see, there are three, I've been having lots of these conversations around R&D, Delhi, Bangalore, etc. It's a core passionate sort of inquiry in my mind. I believe there are three places in that spectrum of research. There's pure research, fundamental research, where you could do anything that seems like a moonshot, long shot. आप वो कर रहे हो, फंडामेंटल रिसर्च कर रहे हो, बीच में अप्लाइड रिसर्च है, इस एंड पे इंजीनियरिंग है, which is completely applied. अब इंडिया में ये बड़ा हो रहा है, सॉफ्टवेयर बना लो, एप्लीकेशन बना लो, निकाल दो, फंडामेंटल रिसर्च बहुत कम हो रही है, तो उसके लिए आपको बहुत पैसा, बहुत पेशेंस, and the society has to have an attitude that this R&D, even if it fails 10 times, it's okay. Like an attitude towards entrepreneurship. 10 बार भी बच्चा का स्टार्टअप फेल हो गया, कुछ नहीं होता, 11वीं बार जीते गए. That mindset is not in India, but we're going to change that. Second, applied research is the best shot India has to use research, come up with innovative technology, but do it efficiently. Right? So do it in a slightly more, how do I say, like with a strategy and a goal in mind. So you can identify 5 areas. You can say climate tech is a big emphasis for me. So now my applied research will focus on energy efficient buildings for India, or the right solar panels for India. Then you can do slightly more applied research on that, and I think that's the way to go for India.
Hello, good evening, sir. Actually, does cyber war is a part of that game, and does it impact on the future perspective? Like currently, the lots of things is coming up actually. Actually, being an IT person, actually, I'm asking this because cyber war is currently very hot topic currently. So does it impact?
हाँ, मेरा एक पूरा चैप्टर है cyber war पे, क्योंकि अब the future of war is actually I would say cyber only, but hybrid. कि physical war भी चलेगी, लेकिन a key domain will be the cyber war. अब रशिया यूक्रेन के केस में देख लो, रशिया ने इस बार physical attack किया, पर पिछले 10 साल से there have been a lot of cyber attacks going on, right, on whoever they wanted to soften up before they would send in the troops.
Syria and Georgia was.
Achha, and I've mentioned many of those examples in the book. Second, India के context में भी हमें ये सोचना है. आज के दिन तक अभी भी हम सिर्फ लैंड, आर्मी, एयरफोर्स, नेवी के पर्सपेक्टिव से सोच रहे हैं. अगली वॉर अगर हमारी होती है नॉर्दर्न नेबर के साथ, तो it might not be in the mountains. It might be that your UID, your India stack, your UPI gets attacked. Your power grids get attacked. If your electricity goes off completely, and by the way, this has happened.
Yes, it has happened. Yes.
If you follow the news carefully, you will see it has happened in India at very critical times during these clashes on the northern border. So this is a high likelihood. And the more India relies on its digital infrastructure, which we are very proud of today, UID, UPI, all of this, कल को उस पर अटैक हो गया, आपके मोबाइल डिवाइस, billion plus devices held by you, held by my army people on the border, held by your military commanders, held by your national strategic community, Delhi, उस पर आपका compromise होता है तो आप क्या करें? So I've talked about the need for a cyber command, the need for a cyber army, the need for cyber offense and cyber defense capabilities. एक बुक में एक मैप है जिसमें आप देखो अगर इंडिया का हार्वर्ड के बेल्फर सेंटर ने स्टडी करी है to study the cyber power capabilities of countries. We are in the bottom left quadrant. So that's a wake-up call. Now, of course, cyber power is one of those things, unlike nuclear bombs which you like to advertise. कि मेरे पास इतने हैं as a form of deterrence. Cyber में most countries don't advertise it. So it could be that that study is wrong. But आप top bottom left में हो, आप क्योंकि top right पे तो नहीं हो. So that's a big weakness, I think, in India's context that we must focus on.
That's a huge vulnerability. Yes.
Yes. Hi, myself Modeep, and I actually have 2 questions for you. One of them being.
Also, please tell me about yourself so I get a sense of your background. Very briefly, क्या करते हो?
Sure. Myself, I'm Anirudh Singh. I'm a software developer at Processing Systems Limited, and I also happen to be a co-organizer at KDG Nagpur, which is Uber Developers Group now. So a lot of tech domain I have. And here comes the geopolitics side, which I was absolutely not that much expert in. But here are the questions. Where is the status of India's R&D in the geopolitical or the global stage, if you call it, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10? I would take 1 as an answer at least.
So, अगर आप we are not very good at that domain as we were discussing just now, but I'll give you one more data point. India spends 0.6% of its GDP on R&D. 0.6%. Korea, you mentioned, which is one of the key winners or emerging winners in the great tech game also, spends over 3.5% of its GDP. China spends 2.5 to 3%. The US I think is in a similar number. So India आप समझ लीजिए, and this is a percentage of GDP. तो अगर GDP बढ़ा तो absolute amount में obviously much bigger. तो इंडिया बहुत पीछे बहुत कम करता है और 0.6% में भी majority of that 0.6% is in pharmaceuticals. जहाँ पे हम generics drugs बनाने के लिए R&D कर रहे हैं. That's also not core innovative tech. हम कोई blockbuster drug नहीं बना रहे हैं वो 0.5-6% से. हम वो figure out करें कि कैसे reverse engineer करके हमने कोई blockbuster drug को यहाँ बनाना. I think we are very, 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 very far. अब आपने कहा एक मत बोलो तो मैं नहीं बोलूँ.
Okay, and the second question being, you must have heard about blockchain, right?
About
Blockchain.
blockchain. हाँ.
So how, what do you think how blockchain can democratize the country?
The blockchain kind of promise is very similar to the promise of the internet. And we discussed this. When the internet started, it seemed like it will take away the power from governments. It will decentralize communication, decentralize the power that traditional power holders like governments have. ना आज के दिन में blockchain के application has been seen कि we will take away the intermediaries of government institutions, RBI, government ministries, etc. The skeptical view on this, which I think I am a believer in, skeptical view ये है कि power holders don't give up power so easily.
Don't give up power.
Don't give up power at all. But कई लोग ले लेते हैं ना, छीन लेते हैं. तो ब्लॉकचेन को भी छीनने के लिए क्या करना है वो हमें सोचना है, वो कंपनीज को सोचना है. बिकॉज इवेंचुअली क्या होगा, कंपनीज ब्लॉकचेन यूज करके कुछ बनाएंगी, लेकिन कंपनीज तो ऑपरेट करेंगे विद इन द डोमेन्स ऑफ गवर्नमेंट्स टुडे. दैट्स द रियलिटी.
So I have two questions. First is regarding the India's position in space technology and its role in geopolitics. Second is with combining both the topics like the technology, geopolitics and its impact on basic human needs like food, shelter, clothing. Like we have seen it with fuel, palm oil and wheat, like recent examples, how it's affecting everything.
तो मेरे को आपका सेकंड क्वेश्चन याद है. पहला क्या था?
Space technology.
Space technology. देखिए, I think space technology is, I would say, though I think Pawan probably knows more about this than I do actually, but space technology is one of those areas where our research institutions have actually done good work and I would say globally competitive work. I think the key for India to do something in space technology from a private sector standpoint. अब पिछले कुछ सालों में difference आ गया कि even in the US, space is being opened up a lot more to the private sector. Space, you know, Mars, so you have many of the Bezos, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk of the world. India is very important that we open it up very quickly. क्योंकि हमारी जो एक core research capabilities हैं, ISRO and other related organizations, very strong. But we've got to bring in more people, more entrepreneurs to really find new applications, new infrastructure, new innovations. So that India can actually become a space tech entrepreneurial power. Space tech में तो हमने काफी अच्छा कर लिया, but to become a space tech entrepreneurial power हमें उसको थोड़ा open up करना है. Second, आपको जो प्रश्न है कि geopolitics का impact on core needs क्या होता है? I think you answered your own question. आज के दिन में यूक्रेन रशिया की वॉर होती है, यहाँ पे वीट की वॉर होती है, palm oil की वॉर होती है. Ultimately, you know, traditionally in India, geopolitics is seen कि अभी तो हम गरीब नेशन है, हमें क्या geopolitics के चक्कर में अभी तो हम पहले इंडिया पाकिस्तान संभाल लें फिर हम और सोचेंगे. But the reality is, as I have described in the Great Games, जब इंडिया में मुगल एम्पायर भी था, चोला एम्पायर भी था, geopolitics was shaping our world. Geopolitics was shaping the future of the people then. Geopolitics is shaping the future today also. अगर हम वो geopolitics नहीं समझेंगे तो कल को हमारी इकोनॉमी, हमारी सोसाइटी की वैल्यूज, देखिए अगर हम geopolitics समझेंगे आज की बिग टेक फर्म्स की, तो कल को आपकी वैल्यूज जो ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी वैल्यूज छोड़ दी थी, वैल्यूज पे आपकी फैमिली में, आपके बेटे बेटियों के, मेरे बेटे बेटियों, आपकी इकोनॉमिक जॉब्स. आज के दिन में देयर इज आल्सो एन अपॉर्चुनिटी. चाइना, as China gets a little bit alienated in the world, there are a lot of new opportunities in India. So if you're an entrepreneur today, sitting in Nagpur, sitting wherever, you should be thinking कि इससे geopolitical implications से economic opportunity क्या निकल के आ रही है. रिस्क की तो हमने बात कर ली काफी, but opportunities भी बहुत राइज हो रही है, right? बहुत ज़्यादा राइज हो रही है. We can talk for hours कि what are the new opportunities that are rising. Climate tech, for example, I mentioned again कि climate tech में इंडिया के पास इतनी opportunities अब आने वाली हैं, right? Given the geopolitics of the world, given the climate crisis of the world, कि अगर हम उसको पकड़ लें as a country, as a nation, as entrepreneurs, उसमें हमारा एक बहुत ज़्यादा leapfrog करने की opportunity है.
Please keep your question short.
Hi, my name is Kalpit. I think the mic's not working. I work in the field of artificial intelligence. And my question is a bit between about media. What do you think personally? What do you think has been the role of media and the control of media by state powers traditionally, while building or sort of while leapfrogging to the leading status in the world in the game of geopolitics?
So how media skews the game, the tech game? Is that right?
So that is one part, but how do states control, and do states typically control media during these phases? Have they traditionally done the same?
करते हैं, yes, and I think you know the answer, yes, I think. करते हैं, answer.
But one last question.
Example में I'll just say अब क्या हो रहा है कि अब now states don't have the power to control the media, है ना? तो अभी big tech firms, social media firms, other new media that are shaping all of us, all of our time, etc. So that's one of the reasons why governments are trying to shape and regulate big tech firms that are the media houses of today. But मैं आपको क्या 10 example दे सकता हूँ where rich, powerful institutions shape the things you read. I'll give you an example. Ukraine में suddenly everyone knows Zelensky. क्यों? Think about it. किसने करवाया वो? रशिया ने करवाया कि suddenly Zelensky हीरो बन जाए सोशल मीडिया पे नहीं. Certain big tech firms that are from a certain nation wanted Zelensky to be a hero to all of us.
Great. So you lean too much. Yeah, too much.
Yes, good evening. Myself Bhavika Kamra, and I am currently 12th standard, studying in 12th standard. So my question is that what exactly inspires you to cover this topic, the topic of great tech game, and also to study and join the links between geopolitics and technology?
Good question. I think मेरा goal ना बड़ा simple है actually. As I said, the reason I wrote it because I was interested in both topics. But मैं चाहता हूँ कि actually हम सब इंडिया में बाहर भी, but इंडिया में भी हम ये गेम समझें. मेरे को ऐसा लगता है कि काफ़ी अब मैं 200 साल पहले तो था नहीं, शायद कोई और वर्जन मेरा था, बट हमने ना काफ़ी बार इंडिया ने वो गेम यूज़ करे क्योंकि हम गेम नहीं समझे. हम कोई और गेम खेलते होते हैं, गेम कुछ और चल रही होती है, हम गेम कुछ और, चेस चल रही होती है, हम तीन पत्ती खेलते. तो माय गोल इज वेरी सिंपल कि हम सब गेम समझें कि वो गेम क्या चल रही है दुनिया में, दैट इज शेपिंग आवर लाइव्स. हम एक बार वो समझ जाएंगे फिर हम खेल सकते हैं वो गेम, फिर हम उस गेम के लिए अपने आप को प्रिपेयर कर सकते हैं, राइट? हम आज के दिन में पुरानी गेम खेलते रहेंगे तो 200 साल बाद भी हम कन्फ्यूजन कर रहे हैं कि वो क्या कर गए लोग, वो कौन सी कंपनी क्या कर रही है, राइट? मैं चाहता हूँ आज हम समझें कि क्या कौन सी कंपनियाँ, कौन सी कंट्रीज. आपने लास्ट क्वेश्चन, इफ वी अंडरस्टैंड 1/10 of what is going on, हम कैसे जीतेंगे?
Fantastic. Yes, last one. Please, absolute last question, brief. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Neil. So my question is that first of all, I'm a psychology student, so it's somehow related to that as well. So we've talked about how internet changes us, values, vice versa, but there's also this thing that we all can collectively agree on, that the Gen Z especially is exhausted by the internet, yet addicted to it. So in the next 30-40 years, when we grow up, do you think there would be a change in why we need that tech power?
Why we
need that kind of tech power?
Explain that. Sorry, in 30-40 years there will be a change in.
So the kind of mindset that we usually have, the Gen Zs usually have, is that we are exhausted by it. We also understand that there are a lot of repercussions, especially I think all over the world Gen Z are aware to it. So do you think when we grow up in the next 30-40 years, we want this tech power for different reasons than the people who currently want it for?
So yes, I think you do it right. एक तो आप when you say I'm very happy that you say when you grow up in 30 to 40 years. I love that. देखो टीवी पे आया ना टाइम पे तो वो जो जनरेशन जिसके लिए टीवी नया था, दे वर ऑब्सेस्ड विद टीवी, है ना. जब सिनेमा आया तो दे वर ऑब्सेस्ड विद सिनेमा. आज के दिन में पिछले 10-15 साल से हम ऑब्सेस्ड हैं विद स्मार्टफोन एंड एवरीथिंग दैट्स ऑन इट. बट ये चेंज होता रहेगा. इफ यू सी द पैटर्न्स, ये चेंज होता है, कुछ और आएगा, राइट. क्या आएगा आई डोंट नो, बट कुछ आएगा. ऑल्सो आई थिंक दैट वी एज ह्यूमंस आर अडैप्टेबल ना. हम अडैप्टेबल क्रीचर्स हैं, हम अडैप्ट करते हैं. आपको पता चलना शौक है कि आप थक रहे हो. एंड यू आर साइकोलॉजी स्टूडेंट, सो आई थिंक यू नो दिस इवन मोर, that the psychology of the internet and mobile usage वगैरह is impacting us many fold. तो जैसे हम उसके बारे में सोचना शुरू करेंगे, हमारा खुद का relationship with the technology will change and evolve. हम उसको थोड़ा कम करना शुरू कर देंगे, I hope. हम उसे अलग तरीके से यूज करना शुरू कर देंगे, राइट. और entrepreneurs आएंगे, businesses आएंगे जो उसको facilitate करेंगे, उस अलग यूज को, different यूज को, राइट. तो वो होगा, naturally I think होगा ही होगा.
Fantastic. So that's the time that we have with him, and I would like to conclude this with one thing that we all Indians have in common. On a street corner, anything happens, we stop and have a bystander's gaze to it. And if we are interested in that silly episode, which has got nothing to do with us, why shouldn't we be interested in something that is happening every day, every moment of our lives in technology and at the highest level of this life on earth in geopolitics? So why should we not be interested? So to show your interest, get your books, buy your book, get it signed by him. Over to you, Arushi. Thank you so much, everyone.
What a wonderful conversation. So much to learn, so much to progress, process, and so much to look forward to, isn't it, leaders? Thank you all for listening so carefully and patiently throughout. It was a really interesting conversation, and one line that struck me the most was that we cannot expect to win in the future by playing a game that belongs to the past, and that holds true for all aspects of life. With that, we should also never forget to celebrate our journeys of the past that have brought us here today, as it brings more meaning to success going forward. I would request our VLF member, Rijuta, who has a birthday today, happy birthday Rijuta, to please step forward and present our author with a one-of-a-kind painting made by our talented artist, Bhavika Kabra from Alag Angle community. Let's have a round of applause. Birthday is getting late for a party. So we did not get the opportunity to listen to our author before, but now he's here. So let's hear from Dr. Ajay Chikade with his book Muthi Talwadu. So please grace us with the book.
नमस्कार, गुड इव्हनिंग, शुभ सायंकाळ. नुकतीच अनिरुद्ध सुरी यांची अतिशय दर्जेदार अशी मुलाखत आपण सर्वांनी ऐकली आणि त्या प्रभावात आपण सर्वजण आहात. तरी पण प्रत्येक 5 मिनिटात मी माझ्या बुकवर बोलणार. विदर्भ लिटररी फेस्टिवलचे आयोजक डायरेक्टर पवन सारदाजी व त्यांचे सहकारी सचिन जहागीरदार, तन्वीर मिर्झा आणि सर्व त्यांना सहकार्य करणारे उपस्थित सर्व रसिक आणि शुद्ध वाचक आणि अतिशय अभिरुची संपन्न वाचक वर्ग इथे बसलेला आहे. मी प्राध्यापक डॉक्टर अजय चिकाटे, इथून 100 किलोमीटर अंतरावर असलेल्या नरखेड येथील एका श्री पंढरीनाथ कला वाणिज्य महाविद्यालयात प्राध्यापक आहे, मराठी विभाग प्रमुख आहे. गेल्या 25 वर्षापासून मी कविता लिहितो आहे, पण त्यातील निवडक कवितांचा संग्रह नुकताच गेल्या वर्षी म्हणजे फेब्रुवारी 2021ला नागपूरच्या विजय प्रकाशनाने तो प्रकाशित केलेला आहे. त्याचं नाव शीर्षक आहे मुठीतील वाळू आणि हे ते पुस्तक आहे मुठीतील वाळू. आणि हा माझा पहिलाच कविता संग्रह आहे आणि या कविता संग्रहात एकूण 70 कवितांचा समावेश आहे. आणि या कविता संग्रहाला महाराष्ट्रातील प्रसिद्ध लेखक, कवी आणि विचारवंत श्रीपाद भालचंद्र जोशी यांची विवेचक अशी प्रस्तावना लागलेली आहे. याचं मुखपृष्ठ सुनील यावलीकर यांनी केलेलं आहे आणि याच्याची रेखाटन आहे ती प्रमोद अणेराव यांची आहे. याची मांडणी जी आहे ती माधव लोखंडे यांची आहे. या कविता संग्रहाला प्रकाशित झाल्याबरोबर नागपुरातील 3 नामवंत अशा साहित्य संस्थांचे पुरस्कार मिळालेले आहेत. त्याच्यामध्ये विदर्भ साहित्य संघ हे सुद्धा आहे. या पुस्तकाची किंमत 900 रुपये आहे, पण विजय प्रकाशन यांनी सवलतीच्या दरात 150 रुपये ठेवलेली आहे. रसिक हो, कविता लेखन काही हा साधा सुद्धा नाही, अतिशय गंभीर असा लेखन प्रकार आहे. कविता असते जीवाचा कल्लोळ, कविता असते स्पंदनांचा सराव. मानवी जीवन व्यापून टाकणाऱ्या या कोलाहलात कविता हाच कविता शाश्वत एकांत असतो. आणि म्हणूनच कविता ही या अर्थाने एक सांस्कृतिक अशी घटना असते. खरं तर महाविद्यालयीन जीवनातच हे कवितेचं रूप माझ्या पालवलं. घरूनच कवितेचा किंवा असा कुठला संस्कार माझ्या घरी नव्हता, साहित्याचा संस्कार नव्हता. पण मी शिकत होतो तेव्हा मला मराठी साहित्य खूप आवडायचं आणि विदर्भातले नामवंत कवी श्रीधर शनिवार हे आम्हाला शिकवत होते. आणि त्यांनी माझ्यातील लिटररी स्पार्क म्हणा किंवा एक साहित्याचाच गुण आहे तो त्यांनी घेरला असावा आणि म्हणून त्यांच्याशी माझी जवळीक होती आणि त्यांचे संस्कार माझ्यावर झालेले आहेत. आणि या म्हणून हळूहळू मी त्यांच्याशी संपर्क वाढत गेला आणि माझ्यातील कविता अशी आकारात येत गेली आणि हळूहळू कवितेतून थेंब उगत राहिले. वेगवेगळी वर्तमानपत्र, नियतकालिक, दिवाळी नको याच्यातून माझी कवितेला स्थान मिळत गेलं. आणि आज माझी कविता जरी संग्रह रूपाने सर्वांच्या पुढे जरी असली तरी पण मराठीतील अनेक मान्यवर असे कवींचे काव्यप्रदेश मी पाहते घालतच माझी कविता पुढे सरकलेली आहे. आणि असं असलं तरी मला जो काही परिवेश लाभलेला आहे त्या परिवेशातूनच माझी कविता प्रामुख्याने अंकुरली फुलली आहे. आणि म्हणूनच ही कविता मित्रांनो, कविता ही या कविता संग्रहात संमिश्र जाणीवांच्या कविता आहेत. म्हणजे काही सामाजिक आशय आहेत, काही व्यक्तिगत भावभावना आहेत त्याच्यामध्ये आणि काही आत्मनिष्ठ आहेत, काही चिंतनशील आहेत, काही थोड्याशा या परिप्रेक्ष्यावर भाष्य करणाऱ्या अशा आहेत. आणि माझ्यावर त्यांचा वैचारिक वारसा जो मला लाभला आहे तर त्याच्याही कविता आहेत. म्हणून या सृजनाच्या या देखण्या पिसऱ्यात आपलं सुद्धा एखादं मोरपीस असावं या भावनेतून मी हे हा काव्यसंग्रह निर्माण केलेला आहे. ज्यात एक छोटीशी 1 मिनिटाची कविता मी आपल्याकडे सादर करतो आणि थांबतो. आपण सर्वांनी मला इथे ऐकून घेतलं. या व्यासपीठावर बोलण्याची मला इथे विदर्भ लिटररी फेस्टिवलने मला संधी उपलब्ध करून दिली. त्यांचे मी आभार मानतो. कवितेचं शीर्षक आहे उत्तर व्हावे. चारुतेचा आगर व्हावे, करुणेचा सागर व्हावे. चारुतेचा आगर व्हावे, करुणेचा सागर व्हावे. कोरडलेल्या गळ्यांसाठी काठभरली घागर व्हावे. विजयाचे प्रस्तर व्हावे, आनंदाचे अत्तर व्हावे. विजयाचे प्रस्तर व्हावे, आनंदाचे अत्तर व्हावे. आलाक्षण फेरताना संघर्षातून पत्थर व्हावे. माणुसकीचा चाकर व्हावे, भुकेल्यांची भाकर व्हावे. माणुसकीचा चाकर व्हावे, भुकेल्यांची भाकर व्हावे. अन्यायाच्या लढ्यासाठी सूर्यासारखे प्रखर व्हावे. पोळलेल्यांना पुंकर व्हावे, नडलेल्यांना सत्वर व्हावे. पोळलेल्यांना पुंकर व्हावे, नडलेल्यांना सत्वर व्हावे. अनेकांच्या प्रश्नापेक्षा एखाद्याचे उत्तर व्हावे. अनेकांच्या प्रश्नापेक्षा एखाद्याचे.
खूप छान सर. लीडर्स तुम्हाला आवडलं तर प्लीज त्यांना सपोर्ट करा. त्यांची बुक बाहेर तुम्ही घेऊ शकता. तर आता आम्ही सचिन रायगड so that was my chance to see him back. Anyway, so I call upon our VLF secretary Sachin Ravindar to give the closing remark and give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Arushi. It's very tough to present a formal vote of thanks, especially when VLF is a cause for the city of Nagpur, and a lot of people contribute to this directly as well as indirectly. I've always been saying that VLF is a volunteers-driven organization. Everyone here is volunteer in different formats. For example, a moderator is a volunteer, I am a volunteer, Arushi is a volunteer. Everyone here is a volunteer. And because of this huge team of volunteers who support us directly as well as indirectly, we have been able to pursue this cause for this city of Nagpur for last 2 years. We come in front of you every month with different authors of variety of subjects, and we'll keep coming in front of you until the next 23 main festival. That's on 4th and 5th February 23. Please mark your calendars. As of now, fingers crossed, 4 and 5 February 23. When VLF as a cause wasn't available as a product, at that point of time, we went to few people and asked them to become our patrons. Most of them are still our patrons, and few of them are present in the hall. बिना किसी प्रोडक्ट को देखे उन्होंने हमारे से उसके लिए पेट्रोनाइज करने के लिए प्रॉमिस किया हमको। जब प्रोडक्ट खड़ा हुआ आपके सामने 20 में, उसके बाद हमारी जर्नी कंटिन्यू रही, एंड जैसे मैंने कहा कि एवरी मंथ वी हैव टू कम इन फ्रंट ऑफ यू, एंड देन व्हिच कल्मिनेट्स इनटू एन एक्स्ट्रावेगेंजा ड्यूरिंग द February of each year. We need continuous funds also. So patrons were definitely with us. In last 1 year, we've been very fortunate to get on to some sponsors. For example, this year the title sponsor is VLF, which is led by Anirudh. We have 2 more sponsors, Cadbury's and can we have that logos of the sponsors, please? So we have Cadbury's and SMS Group as our sponsors. So interestingly, the people who lead these organizations like Arun Lakhani, Ajay Singh, Anand Sancheti, Hemant Loda, and Ishwan Garg, and you all, we all have one thing in common: love for the books and the literature as a whole, and that's what binds us together. And from this desk, we have always been saying that keep buying books, even if you don't read them, still keep buying books. And I think that message has gone deep down to the audience, because since last 2 months we have been able to sell all the books on the counter. Why am I saying this? आज भी ये होना चाहिए और आने वाले समय में भी होना चाहिए. So the thing is कि मैं किसी का नाम नहीं लेता धन्यवाद देने के लिए, because it's a long list, and there are, as I said, that everyone is a volunteer, and then there are people who contribute directly, indirectly, and directly contribute जब करते हैं तो उसमें भी प्रो बोनो सर्विस ऑफर करते हैं. जैसे हमारे फोटोग्राफर साहब हैं, मेरा फोटो लिया कि नहीं भैया, तो ये प्रो बोनो सर्विस हमको ऑफर करते हैं. फिर जो आप YouTube पे वीडियोस देखते हैं वो सार्ट डिजिटल है जो उसको बनाता है. फिर हमारे डिजाइन से वो थिंकिंग बर्ड बनाता है. रेफ्यूज के हमारे पास वॉलंटियर्स काम करते हैं, अलग एंगल से काम करते हैं. कितने लोगों के नाम लेंगे हम, लेकिन ये एक बहुत बड़ा कॉज है इस शहर के लिए. एंड आई थिंक यू the least and the best thing that you can do is keep attending and keep buying books. That's only thing that I always insist from here. So continue supporting us and continue to contribute in whichever way that you can. So the monthly Rama events will continue. So the 17th September event, can we have that? Anita Bhogle will be here on 17th of September. So we'll talk about her latest book. This is just released, I think, or about to release it. Its launch function is, I think, scheduled this month. August, I think it's scheduled. So she's promised to be here on 17th of September, same time, same place. The next one, that's in the month of August, is A Conspiracy by VLF. It's on 13th of August. अभी हमको बहुत सारे लोगों ने कहा कि 13th of August is a very bad time. It's falling on a long weekend. On 15th August. फिर भी हमने conspire किया है because the subject is conspiracy. This is looks like a very serious subject. It's a very intriguing story of how the states of India, the states in India were formed, and it's a conspiracy to have it on 13th August because incidentally it's falling near 15th August. And if at all you have made any plans to move out of Nagpur for a weekend, please reschedule. I am the first victim of that rescheduling. I was really told not to, have this on 13th August, have it post 15th August. But no, it's a conspiracy. The author himself is very happy to have it on 13th of August. He's traveling exclusively for us, cancelling his vacation from Chennai. So thank you, keep coming, keep contributing, keep buying books.
Something that we missed to mention is that the books are on sale. No, wait, I did the calculation myself. Okay, so on Amazon.
Be careful. Otherwise, you're going to pay for it.
Okay.
Better be careful.
Okay. No, so the book on Amazon is for $7.99. Okay, it's got a sale, but we're trying to match that. So Crossword is offering $150 off, and for VLF we're offering $100 off. So the book comes at $550. So please make sure to get your copies and get it signed by Anirudh himself. And you can also indulge in conversations at his convenience and time only. So let's have a beautiful evening, happy Saturday, and see you guys next time. Thank you.